as far as the mitzvah to build the sukkah, there's a lot of discussion about this. There's a Gemara Sukkah, which speaks largely about what constitutes a kosher sukkah. And in the Shulchan Aruch, there are many pages of discussion about all different types of sukkahs and how to build them. So, but luckily, we're learning not from the original Shulchan Aruch, but from the condensed Shulchan Aruch, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And so he's going to try to just share with us those halachas which he thinks are most common for at least the people around him 100 years ago, which are also what's the more common halachas for us today. But certainly when building a sukkah, it is worth sending pictures to your local Orthodox rabbi to make sure that things are in place, because there is a lot that needs to be in place to make sure that the sukkah is actually a kosher sukkah. It's very easy to build a kosher sukkah, but it's also very easy to build a non-kosher sukkah. So that's why you need to make sure that you're doing it right. Let's see what the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch has to say. Okay, so it is a mitzvah to build the sukkah immediately on the day after Yom Kippur, that is today. Even if it is a Friday, Erev Shabbos, when you want to get ready for Shabbos, you should get straight at your sukkah. Why? Because when a mitzvah presents itself, you should not put it off. Mitzvah haba liyadai al tachyach mitzeda. When a mitzvah comes to your hand, don't let it become chametz. Do you know what chametz means? Chametz means that it's sat for at least 18 minutes of nothing happening. So when a mitzvah comes to your hands, don't let it become chametz. Don't let it sit. Rather, do it right away. You should select a clean location to build it. It is a mitzvah for everyone to be personally involved in building the sukkah and laying the schach covering. Even though he is a distinguished person, it is considered an honor to be personally involved in the mitzvah. It would have been appropriate to actually say the bracha shehechiyanu when building the sukkah, but we rely on the shehechiyanu that we say when we make kiddush on the first night of Sukkot. You should also endeavor to decorate the sukkah and to adorn it with beautiful things and elegant spreads according to your means. So, yeah, the mitzvah is not just going into a sukkah, the mitzvah is to build the sukkah. And just like we have a similar concept when it comes to Shabbos, which we'll learn about when we get there, that even the most wealthy of the sages would insist on being in the kitchen on a Friday or going to the marketplace because they wanted to be personally involved. And this is certainly relevant for us in South Africa, where a lot of people have gardeners and different people that they can assist. The schach should definitely be put on by the Jew, or at least shaked, but that would be a requirement. We're not talking about that now. Right now, we're saying that. Actually, I'm not sure if the schach has to be put on by a Jew. Maybe not. I don't remember. We'll get there. But as far as what should be done, we should cherish this mitzvah to build that so special it is that it would warrant its own shehechiyanu, and roll up our sleeves and get involved. Okay, so what should we bear in mind when building our sukkah? Concerning the walls of the sukkah, there are many different halachas, many laws. Not everyone is familiar with them. Therefore, you must just keep it safe, keep it simple. I often tell people there are many solutions to this, but you want to keep it simple. You want to keep it clear without getting caught up into complicated situations. So although there are all different types of sukkahs that qualify, make the walls full length and strong so that the wind cannot shake them or blow the candles. Now, if you have what's very popular today, and that is a frame and then a, what do they call it? A tarp or plastic that goes onto that frame. If that plastic is waving with the wind, to the extent that they'll move more than, we'll learn about it. I think it's 3 tfachim, which is about, a hand breadth is about 10 centimeters. So if the plastic will move more than 30 centimeters with the wind, it's actually not a kosher sukkah. That's very important to bear in mind. So you need to make sure that that tarp is fastened really tightly. And sometimes even when it's fastened tightly, it still moves a lot. So there are other solutions as well. One of the solutions is if you fasten a strap that doesn't move with the wind at all. You know those straps that you fasten like to put stuff onto the roof racks and stuff like that, those fastening straps. So if you get 3 of those straps and you clip them on, or maybe you need 4 of them, every 20 to 30 centimeters from the floor upwards, then it means you'll have what would be maybe considered somewhat of a virtual wall, the minimum height, which is 10 tfachim, which is about a meter high. Basically, if you could get the bottom meter to not move at all, then whatever happens above that is irrelevant, because the walls only need to be about a meter high. So you can ask me more about that solution. But I mean, generally, if you're buying a sukkah, then they should have things in place to resolve this issue. The problem is that as the years go on, sometimes people, the part that makes the walls stuck in place, gets lost or forgotten because it doesn't seem to matter. It seems to be just an extra, but people don't realize that it's an absolute requirement. If you don't have enough wood for 4 walls, it is better to make 3 complete walls than 4 incomplete ones. If you can afford it, it is a mitzvah to build a sukkah with a roof that can open and close on hinges, so that you can close it when it rains. When the rain is over, you can open it again, and as soon as the rain is finished, then it will be dry, as opposed to if you don't have a roof, then even after the rain stops, it's going to continue to drip. This way, the schach is kept dry, and you can fulfill the mitzvah of a sukkah properly. So if you're looking to really have a Rolls-Royce sukkah, I mean, he's not even calling it Rolls-Royce. He says, I guess if you can afford it, then you can have a removable roof. And every sukkah, so I think I had come up with all different types of contraptions in my head of how we could get a cover that comes on and off our sukkah easily. Because it's not so easy, because you need it to be on top of the schach, because that will stop the schach from getting wet. If you can think of a solution for that, then that could help. As far as Shabbos is concerned, you wouldn't actually be allowed to, just like you can't put up an umbrella on Shabbos, so you wouldn't actually be allowed to put down a cover on Shabbos unless it's already stretched over the sukkah a little bit before Shabbos, but maybe we'll get there. With regard to the schach, there are many halachas. It is our custom to cover the sukkah with branches of trees or with reeds, since they grow in the earth and they are detached from the soil and do not absorb ritual impurity. Those are the 3 conditions. It needs to be vegetative, growing from the earth. It needs to be detached, can't still be connected. And it needs to be something that is not able to absorb ritual impurity, which means that it hasn't been made into a vessel. So if you go to, let's say, at home, and you see they have wonderful mats over there for people to sit on, and you say, look, this will make great schach, and it's a fraction of the price of whatever is being sold at the sukkah outlets. So it probably will not qualify, because that mat has been made into a utensil. It serves a function. It's made for sitting on. So it has to be still in its raw state, without anything that contracts ritual impurity, and all natural. So obviously there wouldn't be able to be metal holding it together either. So those are the 3 conditions. But that said, if you just make an order of 38 by 38, I don't know if you know what that is, but they're these basically the cheapest type of thin planks of wood that you could get in any hardware store, like Builders. They cost maybe, anyhow, they're not too expensive. So technically, you could use them as chach alone. If you got a whole lot of 38 by 38s, even though they've already been cut with machinery, they have not been made into a utensil. They're not there to serve a particular function. They still just raw wood that has been chopped in a convenient size. So technically, you would be able to order from Builders a stack of 38 by 38s, and that would be able to serve as all of your schach, and that would be fine, as long as you don't pile them so tightly together that the water can't come inside, because if it becomes water resistant, then that's not going to work. As long as they're not tied together, you have no reason at all to hesitate. So again, there are many halachas regarding the schach, but those are the 3 conditions. It needs to grow, it needs to be cut from its source, and it needs to not have been made into a spoon or any type of receptacle and not tied together. That's condition number 4. Okay. Initially, you should be stringent and avoid placing anything that absorbs ritual impurity, meaning anything that's been made into a receptacle, to serve as a supporting beam for the schach, such as ladders which have in their side pieces holes in which the rungs are inserted, and certainly other utensils. If you wanted to actually lay a ladder across the top to hold the schach in place, that would not work. Like a spade or a rake, even placing them on top of the schach to reinforce it should be avoided. However, if they are in place already or you have nothing else to serve the purpose, all these are permitted, for we have an established rule that it is permitted to support the schach with something that does absorb ritual priority. So in short, if you have a metal frame, then the schach shouldn't go directly on the metal frame. So something else that would have come with your kit when you bought your sukkah is they will give you one or two or a few planks of wood that sit on top of the metal frame, and on top of those planks of wood sits the schach. That way the schach doesn't sit directly on something that has been made into a vessel. If you didn't have that in place, then the sukkah would still be kosher. Okay, now how much schach should we put on? Should put on enough schach to provide more shade than sun. This is also something that I've seen to be an issue. Sometimes people will they have a nice big sukkah and they'll order, let's say, 10 palm branches, and they'll kind of lay them nicely side by side. But sometimes the palm branches, the leaves can be pretty wide apart. And as a result of that, you could end up having much more sun than shade. And if there is more sun than shade, then the sukkah is invalid, biblically speaking. Care must be taken, therefore, to put on enough schach that even if it dries out, meaning if you're having some kind of evergreen that within 2-3 days is going to start withering and drying out, there will still be more shade than sun. You must also be careful not to leave an open space of 3 tvachim, which is about 30 centimeters roughly, in any one place. Initially, it's necessary to leave a slight space between the branches of the sukkah so that the stars can be seen. Nevertheless, if the schach is so thick that the stars cannot be seen, the sukkah is still valid. But if the schach is so thick that even a heavy rain cannot come through, then it is almost like a house and the sukkah is invalid. So that was all about how much schach. Have enough schach to have more shade than sun. Try to leave some kind of space that you could still see the stars. But as long as the rain is coming through, then it is kosher. And it's worth mentioning that in the Chabad tradition, we have a tradition passed down to have a lot of schach, and then almost like just to kind of peek a little hole that you could make a little hole that you could look through to see the stars, as long as provided that it's still raining, and that is based on other sources. So if you're walking into a sukkah and you're not discovering the stars, then there may be a Torah basis for that. Okay, now, so we've put up the walls. We spoke briefly about the walls. We spoke briefly about the schach. Now we're just going to address a few issues that may pop up. So when sukkahs are solidly constructed, sometimes boards jut out along the top of the walls. And on these boards, the beams are placed on which the schach rests. If this board is less than 4 amos wide, the sukkah does not become invalid because of invalid schach. For there is a halachic tradition from Mount Sinai that when a board projects less than 4 amos, we say that it is a curved wall. I'll explain what this means in a moment in the diagram, which means that the protruding board is considered part of the wall, and we regard the wall as if it is bent at the top. This isn't so practical for us today. The one area where it might be practical is if you have a sunroof. If you have a very big sunroof in your car, then and you wanted to put some leaves on there when you go to the game reserve so that you can have a sukkah in the car. So we could look at a moment to see whether that's going to work. But you may not sit or sleep underneath that board, for halacha does not recognize that area as part of the sukkah, even if the board is only 4 tvachim wide. But the rest of the sukkah is valid. But if protruding from the sukkah wall there are boards that are 4 amos or more wide, then they are called invalid schach, which invalidates the entire sukkah. Okay, let me actually make a diagram before we continue so you actually know what I'm talking about. Let's get the whiteboard up. Okay, so here we have How are we going to do this? Okay. Let's just say we're looking from a bird's eye view. So this is the top of your sukkah and you're looking down. Okay. If you want, maybe I could just draw it out a little more. So that's, you're looking down. What's going on here? Okay, you see that over there. Those are your 4 walls. Okay. Now what happened was the walls, at the very top of the walls, you had this. You had boards. So basically, this area over here is all solid. Sorry, it's not working. This whole area over here is all now solid boards. Okay. And then you're looking inside the sukkah through the hole. Okay. So you're saying if the distance from the space where the schach will be, which is in the middle, if that distance is more than, is up to 4 amos wide, which is quite wide. So 4 amos is approximately 2 meters. Okay. So what we say is there's a tradition passed down from Mount Sinai that then we consider the wall to have bent inwards, and then the sukkah will still be kosher even though there's a 2 meter gap approximately from the walls to where the schach starts. A full gap, not an empty gap. So if you had a hollow space around the side, then it wouldn't be kosher because the schach is not meeting the walls. But if you had solid boards going around the top like this, then we consider it as if the walls actually caved in, and then it would still be kosher. So as far as your car is concerned, if you've got a skylight that opens up, so the skylight has to be the measurement of a kosher sukkah, so it's probably too small, so it's probably not going to work. But the other issue is that there is a gap between your skylight and the walls of the car. So that isn't an issue, because if the skylight is less than 2 meters approximately from the walls of the car, then we consider it as if the walls have kind of curved in, which is kind of what it looks like when you're looking at a car, and then it would still be kosher. So it is possible to, I don't know if there are cars that meet the requirements, but another example would be in a house, I guess. If you have a sunroof that opens up in the house, then that sunroof needs to be within 2 meters of the walls, or at least 2.5 of the walls, and then you'd be able to put schach on top. So if you're building a new home and you're designing it and you want to be able to have the sunlight open up and then to put schach right there and then to have a sukkah in your kitchen, so as long as the sunlight is positioned less than approximately 2 meters from the walls of the house, then that would constitute a kosher sukkah. I see the time has hit 5:20. Please God, will continue with the construction and then the mitzvah to live in the sukkah over the next few days. Thank you so much for joining us and wishing you a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks.